Welcome back to the Cannes 2023 Parallel Challenge on Fantasy Film Ball. We are your hosts, Matt and Arnaud.
Every year, some of our favorite films premiere in competition at Cannes and introduce us to some of the most exciting voices in world cinema. So we've started doing a challenge every May where we watch one film by every director in competition, substituting their new film for one of their older films.
Today, we're going to be talking about the Brazilian filmmaker Karim Aïnouz and his English language debut, Firebrand, which stars Alicia Vikander and Jude Law.
Karim Aïnouz is a name that you guys should really take note of, especially if you care about South American/Brazilian filmmaking. This is a Brazilian filmmaker, as you can maybe tell from the name, of Algerian ancestry. He has a very interesting backstory through his family that you can explore in his documentary Mariner of the Mountains that I highly recommend. He went to film school in New York in the US and worked in the US as an assistant, and I think he was mentored by Todd Haynes, who is also in competition this year, so that'll be an interesting reunion. His most notable film is Invisible Life, which won the Un Certain Regard prize in 2019. That's the top prize of the Cannes sidebar, so just under the competition for newer auteurs. He's been a bit of a staple at Cannes ever since. He's gone to Cannes before, and he will be back this year with his English language debut, Firebrand.
Firebrand was a really unexpected title to see in competition. I'm really happy to see someone like Aïnouz get in here. He's a filmmaker that has proven to have a very strong voice, and he really knows how to use color through costume and production design. I am very surprised to hear that he worked with Todd Haynes, but also not surprised at all, because I can see the parallels between how they both use costumes and the influences from Douglas Sirk, who was one of my favorite 1950s filmmakers in Hollywood. Aïnouz does melodrama in a really interesting way that reminds me a lot of those 50s melodramas. And this brings us to our parallel pick. We're going to be talking about his debut film, Madame Satã, which premiered in Un Certain Regard in Cannes in 2002. This is a biopic about João Francisco dos Santos, who is a famous figure in Brazil's queer community in the mid-20th century. Dos Santos was a drag queen, a chef, a pimp, a revolutionary, and eventually a convicted murderer as well. So this film tells the story up until he is sent to jail for 27 years for the crime of murder. Madame Satã, the main character, is portrayed brilliantly by Lázaro Ramos, who brings this sort of crackling energy and physicality to this role that's just magnetic to watch. Performance is one that belongs alongside the greats, and it defines this film. You just can't look away from the movie because you're watching this performance. I don't know if I'd put it exactly on the same level as this, but I would compare it to like Raging Bull in terms of how magnetic this performance is.
Talk about the role of a lifetime. I mean, as an actor, being offered this kind of role you would be just like mouth-watering at the thought of playing this character. A feast for an actor to play a role like this. I really, really love this film. I love these kinds of genre mashups. I mean, this is a biopic in the sense that it is telling a part of the life of a real character, of a real person, but it's got sides of action, of crime, of dance even. I mean, this is a great fit for this character. Like you've said in your description, it sounds like he's done it all in life. This is a beautifully shot film and edited. Just from the beginning, you get like these great soft focuses, these great colors and lighting and use of locations, but never in a sense that feels like it's a director trying to show off. It really does feel controlled and refined. It actually starts with an off-screen police report as we just see our main character kind of beaten, sitting in a jail cell, and you're just told these horrible things about this character. And then the film really starts before this happened, and we only go back to this scene where the police report says more things, and as an audience member, we're left here to kind of reassess. So it's a really interesting structure for biopic, especially since this character, from what I understand, Matt, is mostly well known for things that happened after his jail time, and we're essentially seeing entirely his backstory. So this is like the superhero origin story.
The choice to set the whole film before going to prison is very interesting because, like you just mentioned, this person became very famous and became very well known in the queer community in Brazil after prison. So it kind of circumvents that classic womb to tomb biopic by focusing only on the era before going to prison. But that said, it does still fall prey to a few cliched scenes that feel like they belong in your average biopic, even though this is not your average biopic. In particular, some stuff after the main character has kids and talks about fighting to provide for them, it sometimes feels like it's from a much weaker film than this one actually is. But like you mentioned, the visual eye that Aïnouz has is so clear here, even with a film that has a muddy color palette to it with lo-fi camera work. Nothing really pops off the screen, but it has a very brilliant, cohesive look for a film about a charismatic, unique gangster. I don't think that there's ever been another gangster quite like this.
Feels a little bit like the first 30 minutes of Malcolm X was made into an entire movie, doesn't it?
Yes, yes. That's exactly what it feels like. That is the perfect description, I think, of Madame Satã. As Daniel Scheinert would say, it's the crime part of Malcolm X. I really, really like how morally complex this story allows the main character to be. He's a paradox, not an idol. He's not someone that we're meant to look at and go, this is a perfect person, as so many biopics do. He complains about not wanting to be exploited and fights against exploitation while being a pimp who exploits others and makes them pimp themselves out until they literally cannot move anymore. He's a drag performer who wields his femininity on stage while using aggressive masculinity to intimidate people as a gangster off stage. So it's a portrayal of these sort of paradoxes and contradictions, and it all comes down to the physicality of this performance. Again, Lázaro Ramos is just so magnetic. But let's talk Firebrand. I think that Madame Satã, seeing this, just further proves what you and I both saw before in Invisible Life. Aïnouz is a filmmaker with a distinct visual style and flair, and an ability to portray really complex and fascinating characters. We've only seen some photos from Firebrand so far, but the costume design looks gorgeous, which I expected from this filmmaker. Like we mentioned, this is Aïnouz's English language debut. It stars Alicia Vikander and Jude Law. It is about the last wife of King Henry VIII, and it's apparently some sort of creepy psychological thriller. It's based on a book called The Queen's Gambit, has nothing to do with the Netflix series. From the premise, it sounds like it's a kind of existential horror about a woman trying to outlive a man who's gotten rid of 5 wives before her, mostly through beheadings.
Harken back on Queen's Gambit. Apparently, the name of the film was changed because of the success of the Queen's Gambit, the TV show, which is a good move. Thinking of Aïnouz going into existential horror just kind of, for me, reaffirms what I've kind of learned through watching Madame Satã. Madame Satã proved to me that he doesn't just do melodramas, he's also capable of doing these really interesting character study films that don't have the same kind of overly emotional arc or whatever. And in here, he's diving into existential horror, which is an entirely other emotion or other tone. What it is clear to me, though, is that Aïnouz loves his underdogs and his characters that are kind of repressed from society. In that way, I can see him being maybe a parallel to a director like Almodovar in just how much he loves his actors and just kind of wants to give them really, really meaty roles. It's hard to tell just how unique this film will actually look and feel just based on the one still we have as the time of this recording. And, English period dramas do so with Cannes juries. I don't know if I would predict this to a prize. I mean, Vikander, an actress, is possible, even though Cannes doesn't necessarily favor big names. As far as Oscars go, this is going to be very reliant on the quality of this film, which, we'll see when reviews come out. But it's really hard to predict that stuff with the little information we have. We just don't know if this is a hit or not.
What we do know is that this movie is going to be fascinating. Aïnouz is a filmmaker that is really interesting. So whether this is going to be an Oscar movie or not, I would lean towards maybe not, because a horror about Tudor era England, I don't know about that. But that said, stranger things have happened, and the Oscars do like period pieces, especially ones that kind of have that elevated Oscar bait profile, which this one just might. Could this be a prize contender at Cannes? Like you said, this type of English language period drama doesn't typically do incredibly well at Cannes, but if this is really unique, it's a distinct vision, I could see it possibly picking up a jury prize. I'm not going to predict it for a prize right now until we see how it is, because again, this was one of the most unexpected and out of left field selections. So predicting it for a prize right away just based on how much we liked Madame Satã doesn't seem wise until we see those reviews. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Cannes Parallel Challenge. Make sure that you subscribe so you can keep watching us on our journey to discover who our Palme d'Or will be.